My name is Dr. Shannon Harris, and I am an assistant professor for the Bachelor of Science in Health Information Management program here at UAGC. I will be the host of this session, Reflections on TLC 2024 Learning Outcomes. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also, we have enabled live transcription. If you would like to use it, click the Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Now, I'm pleased to introduce to you some of our UAGC leadership who will be on today's panel. We have Dr. Blake Naughton, Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Learning and Teaching for Online Initiatives, Dr. Tony Farrell, Dean for the College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. Justin Harrison, Dean for the School of General Studies, Dr. Teresa Kuruk, Vice President for Faculty Affairs, and Dr. Barbara Zorn, Associate Vice President for the Office of Graduate Studies and Professional Accreditation. I will now turn it over to our panel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. Appreciate the introduction. All right, everyone. Well, we're reaching the end of day 3, and it's time to reflect on what we have learned so far. So let's revisit those learning outcomes that we co-constructed together on day 1 of the conference. Knowing that conferences are critical learning experiences because people learn most effectively together, that's us here in our TLC community, we used a social constructivist learning approach together to co-construct conference learning outcomes. So to begin this reflection session, let's take a look at those outcomes. Here they are again. There were 3. Learn how to apply and analyze creative approaches to fostering belonging in the online classroom. Use knowledge of barriers and challenges to belonging to apply solutions in the online classroom. And finally, initiate reciprocal learning, sharing and listening among colleagues by sharing from experiences or from my experience and validating others' ideas in sessions. So over this last week, over the last 3 days, you've been busy giving us your feedback on these learning outcomes and action items that you're taking away from each session that you have attended. We've put all of those thoughts here together, and you can see while our thoughts are diverse, students are at the center of our thoughts, our hearts, and our minds. You'll see call outs here to increasing transparency, using AI, assessment in belonging. You will also see call outs to writing tools and many more. So we also have an opportunity to do a little bit of reflecting together now. And I would like us all, this is something that I love to do with my team. And so please scan the QR code. Let me put that back up here. I hope you'll scan the QR code and share something that you consider a win, something you learned, something new that you encountered. Maybe you made a connection with someone in the TLC community. And so I'd like to have everyone share their win. Go ahead and scan that QR code. And I see that participants are typing. We have about 70 folks in our session today, so I'm sure we have lots of wins to share. I'm seeing AI innovation in the classroom. Yes, we spent a lot of time yesterday talking about AI and its impact on belonging. Engagement, dedication, application. I'm seeing another call out to sharing how to use AI. There's 3 words that just popped out to me: connection, commitment, and re-energized. And I don't know about you, but that is definitely how I am feeling as well after the past 3 days with TLC. Networking, yes. Networking is important so that we can learn together in our own community. We'll give everyone just a few more seconds. And then I'm going to turn it over to our panel of leaders here to share their reflections on TLC. differentiating learning, learning styles, and structure, connection. I see some call outs to some specific sessions. Well, thank you all for sharing. Feel free to continue to type in there and we will capture this last word cloud. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Haley. And can we just give a virtual round of applause to Haley and the entire team for everything they've been doing to get us here. I love that we begin with begin with the end in mind. Like, what are we going to learn in this conference? And I appreciate everyone engaging in the word clouds and thinking about your thinking along the way. That's such a more active demonstration of what we do at a conference than what happens when we normally show up to a conference. Especially in an in-person space and sit in the back of the room and let our minds wander, whatever. So I appreciate everyone coming together with that. So in order to sort of dig in to the learning from the conference and reflect on it with our academic leadership team here today, we're going to start by a little bit of context about a learning organization and thinking about being a learning organization in general, and then applying that in the context of what we're doing here. And then we'll dive right into our panelists to think about the connections they've made within a learning organization here. So I know most of you are with UAGC and many of you are not. This applies whether you're a part of this organization or any organization. How do you intentionally think about learning within your organization? How do you reflect that back in your practice, and where does that surface so that we continue to get better along the way? So I'm going to give the very brief Cliff Notesy version, or Cliff Notes even a thing anymore. So this is how already I'm dated and we're thinking about it. I don't know. My daughters don't know what Cliff Notes is. There was all sorts of other notes, I think, along the way. But the Cliff Notes version of what a learning organization is, and I'd love to particularly with our academic community, to think about a learning organization in a broader sense at a future point in time. But for today, I'm going to share just a couple of slides so that I tip my hand a bit about what I think a learning organization is, and we can use that as a framing through this conversation. So first of all, what I think about a learning organization is asking some simple questions and thinking about what are we doing as an organization and what am I doing as an individual within this organization? And what that means is, how do we learn together? That our practice, when we're helping students learn, we're helping to more efficiently work in our advising office or financial aid office or wherever it is that our team is a constant learning process. And so how do we, rather than set up our work as an accountability process of just, I've got to hit these metrics, check, 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 but I've got to, yes, hit some milestones and also learn along the way and inform my practice. And so that's the heart of it in a nutshell. And so the way that I think about that is in sort of three different layers. One is thinking about my team's aims. And I could be in a department, a division, an office, whatever your team is. What are my team's aims? What are we going for? Have we reached an agreement around that? And then what are my aims to contribute to that? What am I doing as a part of that? Or how am I growing as a professional? I think a lot of us do that, maybe in an annual cycle of our performance evaluations or goal setting or whatever that might be. But rarely do we do that outside of our individual context and think, well, this part of our team. Our team is going in a certain direction for the year, and what does that look like along the way? And then, I think a lot of organizations then immediately go to some KPIs. They go to those key performance indicators. Then, well, how do I know if I made it? How do I know? How do I know? Or why don't we just start with, well, what are some things I might try? What's it look like to try to get there? What am I going to do for my own learning because some of that's going to be a big pile of crap, and I'm not going to do it right. And it's going to be a learning that it didn't work. And so how do I think about that and then learn from that? So instead of thinking about how am I going to make that mark, how am I going to learn about the ways that get toward that mark, what that is? And so how then another question is like, then how does that work across the organization? I can't just think in silos. It's not just my team, but I work with a number of different people. If I'm a faculty member and I'm thinking about that, I got to think about my instructional designers I work with. I got to think about the academic advisors I work with. I got to think about the registrar's office I work with. How does all that come together? How am I contributing? How are they contributing? And how does that then really situate my planning for the year around an ethos of learning and not just an ethos of did I make my numbers, and what does that look like along the way? And so to simplify all that along the way, I think about just the question, how might we? How might we assure learning in our classes? How might we assure belonging with our students so that then they learn along the way? And it's very simple of how we get there. We just ask the question, well, what's an agreement about what are we trying to get at? So let's say we are agreeing that we want belonging and that we see belonging in a certain way and that we're at an agreement that we think teaching and learning will be more successful if we situate ourselves around belonging in some way. And then we think about, well, what are those experiments? What am I going to try? What's going to get at that? What can I take away from these 3 days of learning from this conference that might be something I'm going to try and test and see what happens along the way? And then the critical part that we forget. Most of us then determine what we did for the year in a post-mortem private meeting with our supervisor where we're evaluated at the end of the year. This work, this didn't, I don't want to tell anyone. Rather than this transparent ethos of, hey, this is what happened. Boy, did that go in a ditch? Or, oh my gosh, you will not believe how outstanding this was. And this was what worked really well in my classroom or with my students along the way. And how do we intentionally share those stories? Sometimes we come together in a conference setting. And so what these presenters have done over the past couple of days is this enormous prospect of sharing the stories of what worked for them, what worked from their research, whatever they've seen in practice along the way. And that's critical. And we do that at conferences, but do we do that as a regular routine of our department meetings? Or do we just kind of check off where we are in some project in our department meetings? Where are we sharing those stories of learning along the way? And friends, if you want to be in a learning organization, that's it. It's very easy. I like things in threes. I like things being simple. We just come to an agreement, we try some stuff, and then we are transparent about it and share it along the way. A whole lot under the hood of how to make that really happen. And we can keep working on that, but that's the base of it along the way. You want to dive one layer deeper, the way that I think about that is to build a plan from it. That rather than a strategic plan, and this will be the last sort of thing that I share with you, rather than building a strategic plan where we are going to hit this mark 3 years from now, and I know what October of 2027 is going to look like, which I obviously don't. What do I want to learn by October of 2027? What do I want to come along the way? And so to do that, we reach an agreement. We identify those experiments and then we share that along the way. Underneath that are some nuances to that where we think about our identity as a team in an organization or a university and the purpose and the aims that we're getting at, where we are and where we need to go. In the experiments, how do we align that with others along the way so that we aren't just all going in different directions? How do we reach agreements critically around that? And how do we assess whether they worked or not? Do we have a shared understanding from the get-go, those agreements of how we measure that? And then the final piece is like, how are we sensing and responding and doing something different along the way? Where are we intentionally looking at those assessments and having cycles of learning and improvement then based on that? And then how do we share that and communicate that out along the way? So that's a whole nother conference in and of itself, not just one talk, or you could take a semester long class for me. And I used to teach this kind of thing along the way. But that's the critical way that I think about it. And the way that I want to think about it as we look toward an understanding of what we got out of this conference. Well, what am I going to take from this and reach an agreement? Is this where we're going? Is this what belonging means in the definition of our students and what that could be? Is this how we see learning coming from that? How do I get advice in a peer process to assure that I'm doing this right and get transparency around my work? And then how do I get feedback in a cycle of learning from that? So if you want to dive deeper into any of that, there's been other chat questions I've seen along the way the past few days asking about books. Here are some favorite books, according to Blake, that get at how we run an organization like that. If you start anywhere, start at Brave New Work, which is a good, easy read, fast read about the way that we think differently about it. So you can sort of take some of these downs or screenshot this if you're interested in a deeper dive in learning. For those of you that work with me at UAGC, this is a insight into Blake's mind. For those of you that don't care a hooey about Blake's mind, that's fine too. And then how do you think about where you work and the space that you're in and the team that you're a part of, and how to maybe think differently about that so that it feels really enriching and not fear-based, and how we can try new things and get at a better outcome for our students along the way. All right. That's the wind up before the pitch, friends, and thinking about a learning organization 101 in about 5 minutes. About our learning organization. And so why did I do all that? We just went through a conference. We're talking about student learning, not learning organizations, not in your option mind. And that may be true. But the way I think about that is that when I think about, and I often scribble a whole lot of notes at a conference, and then I come back on the airplane or train ride, or if it's a virtual conference, and a reflective moment afterward to say, what am I going to do? Where's this go? And so part of what I'm going to challenge our academic leaders is to think about where's this go and what's that look like along the way for application so that we can do that along the way. So friends and panelists that are part of the conversation today. So Tony, Teresa, Barb, and Justin, thanks for joining this conversation and bringing your insights with it as well. I'd like to invite first to think a little bit about some of the particular kinds of sessions and some of the questions that came out. So I'm going to seed some opportunities for dialogue from each of you, but then also invite you to take it any which tangential way that you want along the way. And if we're off track, you just say, well, that was an experiment. Just get right back on track. You said we're learning here. So we'll learn how to get back on track in the conversation. So first, I'd like to understand a little bit. We started, not everyone here is part of land-grant institution, but many are along the way. But even if you're not part of a land-grant institution, of course, what many of you in online learning space is about extending learning to learners that wouldn't get it otherwise, which is the heart of a land-grant and the conversation that we had there. But I think some of our panel might have been animated a little bit about the notion of how we apply the land-grant mission in an online space and where that goes and whatever. So I'm gonna start and pick on my colleague Barb first and say, Barb, I want to know a little bit about your thinking about that and about what online education is and an equitable approach to that. And if we're thinking about people belonging, where all that hit with you, and just to throw out the land-grant mission for you and your learning.
Thank you. Dr. Stewart's presentation I thought was so very compelling and really very thought-provoking, for me. And it made me think about that learning continuum that he, had discussed and asked us to keep in mind as one of the 5 points to kind of take away with us. And part of that continuum included knowledge creation. And it immediately reminded me of our doctoral students who come to us. And I applaud them. They come to us with such passion and a call for action. And they work in communities and with populations who are stricken, with grief and perhaps mental illness, and in crises. And they come to me and as part of their research, the first thing that they'll say is, in my research, I want to prove. And then, of course, that's a cringeworthy moment. And they say, no, we're not going to prove. We're going to open your mind, and we're actually going to disprove and take on those multiple perspectives. And after you have a reasonably shaped proposal with some testable hypotheses, we're going to hold it against those cold, hard statistics. And that said, then you'll be able to have confidence in your results. And hopefully your mindset has shifted and expanded where you can go back to your communities as experts in the field, and you can affect change beyond what you did before. And that really speaks to what we do. Not only are we improving the immediate lives of our students, but in turn, they are going out in the world and having an enormous influence beyond themselves. And that to me is so encouraging. And it really hit home for me, in Dr. Stewart's talk about that purpose of a land grant and to uplift, the sons and daughters of toil and labor. And I know for sure that that's what we do with all of our students. And for me in particular, our doctoral students.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks, Barb. I love the connection of, sometimes we think about the tripartite mission and then the piece of creation knowledge. Well, that's for these multi-million-dollar National Science Foundation grants on main campus. We're like, but no, our students are creating knowledge. Our doctoral students definitely, but our other students are doing that as well as they go to those other missions and they're applying that knowledge. And when we apply, we create, and it's kind of a reciprocal process. I love you calling that out for us. Thanks for that. Tony, I'm wondering how that lands with you and thinking about you're a longtime educator and the way that we fulfill our educational mission and where that fits in.
Thanks, Blake. And first of all, I appreciate your list of books because there were a couple of my favorite authors there. And, for me, when I think about our land grant mission, I think about teaching and how do we teach and our curriculum. how does that impact our students? And then certainly how are they applying that? But in the context of that, I think about equity. How are we providing equity for our students that come to our classrooms from a multitude of different environments? And then so leaning on some of the my foundational work as it relates to how do we serve our students. I think about Simon Sinek and, the start with why, and always think about, if you think about his golden circle, the why, how, what. And our students are always at the center of what we do, and how do we serve them, and what are we hoping that they show us as far as their learning. And so when I think about that piece, I really think about, the question is, what are some of the creative approaches that we can help support our students in the classroom so that they can demonstrate their learning and certainly provide equity? And I think it really is incumbent on us as educators when we think about experimenting to provide students ways in which that they can demonstrate their knowledge through different types of activities, through different demonstrations of learning mastery. When we think about our learning outcomes, how do we get our students to get there? And I think that for us, that equity piece comes in that there may be different ways in which that students can demonstrate learning. And is that through a paper? Is that through a presentation? Is that through a discussion? And so, circling back to what Dr. Marshall or Dr. Stewart said yesterday about the teaching and application, is that, I think our mission is to support our students in the classroom and be innovative in how we teach, but also how do we get them to demonstrate their knowledge. And so again, there's multiple ways, and I can talk about how we have done that in the past. But the biggest thing that I think about when it comes to that piece about a sense of belonging is getting to know our students well, understanding our students, where they, their circumstances, where they come from, how do they interact with each other, how do they interact with us. And I think as faculty and as leaders, we have to really put an emphasis on how do we connect with our students. And I think that relationship piece, number one, will help our students feel a sense of belonging in the classroom so that we can do those other things.
Oh, thank you for that, Tony. And what's really fascinating to me is the way that you connected equity to belonging, and what you just said, in that if we think about more equitable approaches to measuring learning, and we've gotten this down to a science, we're measuring a lot of learning, but are we only showing that demonstration of learning in narrow ways? But is it embracing student belonging in a broader sense if we think more creatively about the ways that they can demonstrate that learning? Is that a more equitable approach, and one that'll bring in a greater sense of belonging and learning? I hadn't thought of it in that way. I love the connection that you made there. I'm thinking then about, well, how do we get more creative about the way that we demonstrate learning along the way? And yesterday was a day of creativity, if there ever was one. We were talking a lot about AI and the AI applications in a learning context, and in ways that I hadn't previously contemplated. And I'm wondering if our panelists are interested in talking a little bit about the learning from AI and how we fit that into this context of learning, and what you took away from that along the way. I'll call you out if you don't want to jump in. Barb, I think I'll go back to you. You said something about AI.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it was a little bit of a mind shift. One of the talks had, mentioned that there's two people when it comes to viewing AI. And then the one person, views AI as a tool, and another person views AI as a learning partner. And I confess I'm the one on the side of thinking it as a tool. And I never really thought about it as a collaborator or a partner. But after seeing some of the demonstrations and discussion of how faculty use AI, to lighten their load, to help them really focus on what's important in the classroom, as well as how we might use that to really build equity, and that sense of belonging for students. And, you know, that is really speaking to that differentiated learning, as well as providing new and interesting ways to summarize material, and as well to use it as a tool, you know, to identify our worldviews and limitations in our worldviews. And what a wonderful way to help students think critically, which is always such a challenge in the classroom. So now we have this wonderful tool, and I dare say a potential learning partner that can aid us in bringing that, you know, that belonging and equity back into the classroom.
I think that's great. And certainly, AI exploded. I'm teaching the classroom at the time. Our initial reaction is, how do we box it in, right? How do we put like lanes around it rather than partnership? Like, we just this seemed like a barrier to be overcome, not like, oh, this is going to change our learning along the way. Justin, we've kept you quiet for too long. Do you see applications for AI that emerged for you, that we're thinking about how that connects to your school? In general studies sees a broad range of students, and we're thinking about equitable approaches and thinking about these learning partners in a different way. Do you see something that you had any takeaways there?
Yeah, I didn't attend Barb's session, but I loved the ideas, and I was thinking about it last night. AI can really be anything. And I know you asked about SGS in particular, Blake, but the beauty of AI is that you can ask it to be anything. So not only a learning partner, you can ask it to be a life coach. You can ask it to be a therapist. You know, Gary talks about Carl Rogers a lot. You can ask it to be a Rogerian therapist and to interpret the world with you, and you can talk to it. You can ask it to be a nutritionist. You can ask it to give you, if you like Mediterranean food and you've only eaten it in restaurants, you can ask it to set up a whole meal plan. You can ask it to tell you what you should buy from the store in order to make the dishes that you love so much. Like the world of AI it's really infinite. And so, you know, if you don't have Microsoft Copilot, it's one of the AI tools that can actually create images. One of my daughter's favorite things to do when we're waiting or whatever in different places is to create images on Copilot with me. So she says things like, Dad, I want a picture of a spider eating a shark. This is a true story. And I type in, can you make a spider eating a shark? And then she loves it. And she's like, actually, I want it darker. And so I'm like, can you make it creepier? And it makes it creepier. And then she'll take it to her mother and say, Mom, look what I made. Right. Now,
Oh,
she
wow.
didn't make it, right? She didn't make it, but she created it from her own mind. Right. So I think by the way, you should try this if you have young children or whatever. If you need a story and they ask you to make up a story, you can just ask ChatGPT to create a story about mermaids that live underwater, but there are unicorns there too. And you can read those stories to your kids and you can keep going with it and let their creativity flow. But I just thought about what Barb said and that session. And I would just encourage people to explore the tools as it relates to our students. You know, I attended a couple weeks ago a session from somebody from the AAC&U. He wrote a book recently about teaching with AI that I think our internal committee is reading. But it's pretty evident that AI is here. It's here to stay. This was mentioned by Dr. Stewart too. And so there is going to be a gap between the people who know how to use it and those who don't.
Right.
And so I do think it's our responsibility to start teaching our students how to use it. And just to add another perspective, there's another perspective that believes that AI is just a tool used to cheat. And there are lots of uses for AI, or an infinite number of uses for AI beyond that. And so I think we need to work with our students to help them understand all the uses and to help them ethically use it. And then we need to systematically introduce these skills in ways that we can develop them in students so that they can take them out into their careers and into their personal lives and create more success.
Yeah, I think that's great. How do we take it out, right? That was, if you come from the land grant mission, how do we take that tool out and how do we connect it to careers? And one of the ways that we talked about in some sessions, I think was, and again, thinking about equitable approaches, is that the way that works is very different. The land grant was set up at a time where we had a much more monoculture in a rural area that land-grant universities were trying to aim for, and that's very different now. So I'm curious about reactions you might have had. And Tony, I might bug you again to think about um, our students are here for very different degree outcomes, and they come from different populations, and they're geographically dispersed, at least nationwide, if not worldwide. And yet, our charge is to enable their learning through belonging. How do you do that differentially with the variety of populations that we have in our classroom spaces?
That's a great question. I think I lean back on that relationship building and understanding the students in your classroom. And for me, there is no greater tool within the online classroom than poster introduction, than to really take the time to not only read where your students are from, but understand the circumstances that they bring into the classroom. I mean, you could have a student who lives in Georgia who may be a early childhood educator sitting in a class alongside somebody who is deployed, a military member who's deployed in the Middle East. And so you as an educator, I think it's your responsibility to try to really understand and learn about your students and have some empathy related to what a student is going through, I would say the things that they bring into the classroom, and be open to really connecting with those students. I think another piece too is that institutionally we have an initiative, a university-wide initiative called Culture of Care, and I think I've heard it mentioned multiple times. And it's really part of that is having this underlying belief that students can be successful, and having that paradigm and that disposition in the classroom that students can be successful. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, Blake, about
Yeah.
supporting students across different parts of the US or a part of the country, and different potentially even socioeconomic statuses, and having different types of outcomes. But I think the biggest thing for us is to really have a desire to connect with our students and to create a community within the classroom, which again is that essence of belonging.
Yeah, so you know, as I hear you talking, I think about the ways that I've asked for introductions in a classroom in the past, which is like whatever, name and zip code and where you work or something. Like that's such a that's something, it's important, but that's such a superficial understanding of where they really come from, because we think come from means where do you work and what your zip code is, rather than the space they enter that classroom in. They're building something that gives us a clue of a deeper understanding of learning, a deeper understanding of how to connect them to the tools that'll assure their success, and deeper understanding of helping those students feel like they belong in the classroom along the way. But what we're discussing here, in contrast to the way that I framed the beginning about a learning organization and getting better at this, is very isolated strategies. I'm going to do this in my classroom. So, Dean Farrell, how do you extract that back a bit to patterns of evidence, to bigger understanding, so that when you onboard, say, a new faculty member, and you're helping them to understand the strategies for this, you're giving them something more than how to be a nice guy and ask a couple questions.
So I think the onboarding process is really important, right? In working with faculty affairs and Teresa and Haley, I think the biggest thing is bringing on faculty who really align with our mission and vision of how we support students in the classroom. I think, in my career as an educator, I've had the wonderful opportunity to be able to hire faculty, whether it's the K-12 level here or in higher education. And, to me, it's the greatest responsibility that we have as leaders, is to hire the right people, and the people that are empathetic and have a sense of mission and vision. And so the new faculty experience is absolutely really important. And I think the biggest thing too is that sense of mentoring and coaching that happens with our faculty members early. So if we want to look at their effectiveness, certainly we have data related to student success that we pull out, and we look at that individual faculty member. We have end of course surveys. We have we look at the course level related to completion, success rate, things, all of these things. But when I look at how, if I'm looking at a faculty member and their impact, the one thing that I I try to coach it, or we try to coach it, is again that disposition of believing
Mm.
that students can learn. And so, that dispositional approach to the classroom to me is probably the most important.
Well, that's critical. I don't think we've gone in depth on disposition, but that's interesting. And it's what I would connect that to our theme of belonging is that students can sniff out your disposition. And if
Absolutely.
they are getting a clue that you don't belong, it comes through, right?
Oh,
It comes
absolutely.
through. Yeah, yeah. Teresa, he
Blake,
called.
could I? Oh,
Oh yeah,
sorry.
go ahead, Justin.
I was just going to jump in there because my mind kind of went a little bit of a different direction, but as it relates to our classroom, um, I think we have a lot of great educators here, right, in the room right now. I do think though that there are some opportunities that we have institutionally to bring humanization into the class, and I know that Nate presented on this yesterday. Dr. Pritz presented on this yesterday. But the utilization of video, we have evolved to see people's faces and to engage with micro expressions and body language and voice. So the use of video and audio in addition to text, I think, can create a humanization, a sense of belonging, encouraging students to use it too. And then, in the classroom itself, like if you see students struggling, it's always great to send an email, but a phone call um, can really go a long way. And even, a lot of times you won't get a hold of the student, but leaving a message for them, letting them know that you care, hearing your voice, them knowing that you're taking that extra step. And the other thing I would say is, all of us here spend a lot of time chasing our striving students or sometimes our struggling students, but celebrate the students who are doing really well too. Give them a call, and just and say, hey, every time I grade your paper, it's just a breath of fresh air. You're just doing an excellent job. Encourage them to join the honors program if you have little plug for the honors program. But if you have a great student, they might not join. But if you send an email or you give them a phone call and just say, hey, I really think you'd be a great honors student, you might consider it. Just bolstering, because we never know where people are coming from. They might not have ever had a parent that said that they love them or that they did a good job.
Right.
They might not have ever had a teacher that said that to them. You might be the first person ever who has affirmed them. My mom still tells the story of her dad saying it was pointless to send a woman to college and she was a great student in high school. She ended up becoming a professor in nursing, right? But that still lives with her. That was her experience as a child, as a woman growing up, Blake, in Missouri. And she overcame it. But like she talks about the faculty member and her undergrad who believed in her, right? Who saw something good in her, and it gave her all the confidence in the world, and she ended up getting her doctorate later in life. And so anyway, let's be those people. Let's be the people that like take that extra step to let our students know how well they're doing and how much we care about them.
Thank you for sharing that story in particular. But also it connects to what you were saying about that human connection and that phone call and that outreach and that the power of that. So I studied engineering as an undergraduate, and sometimes I go to a conference and I think, oh, this is going to give me the tools. If I just engineer this to death, I'm going to get it. But we're in a social organization. There are real humans underneath this that have that lived experience, that we can either reinforce that negative, if it was a negative lived experience, or redirect that and direct that toward belonging and learning along the way. And I share that sort of this engineer mindset. That's a admission of a disposition that I'm not normally wired like that. Like for me to just pick up a phone and call a student is just like orthogonal to the way that I think, because I think in using words like orthogonal. And so I don't really do that. And so I hope that we think about the ways that we share these stories of, oh, I did that. Like I tested myself and I said, I'm going to call 5 students in this class at some point in this 5-week course. And gosh, did that have an effect? I had no idea. And so it's that sort of reinforcing what adding the humanity to our work kind of is. Thank you for that, Justin. Teresa, I tried to bug you a second ago. We were talking about faculty, and we were talking about dispositions, we're talking about ways that we think about that. And you've started as a faculty member as a couple places. You have evolved as a faculty member through mentorship and support in other places. How do we connect the learnings that we got from this conference to the way that we support our colleagues or the way that we support ourselves in growth as faculty members? Do you see a pathway of applying it that way?
Absolutely. I really appreciate the question because I've been seeing a thread through what you and Barb and Tony and Justin have been talking about that I think can tie to this answer. So we talk about belonging in a lot of different contexts. One of the questions this conference posed was, how do you define it? And one of those sub definitions was, what is intellectual belonging? And I think Barb, Tony, and Justin all just spoke to that in different ways. All of our students create knowledge. We have to ensure that they know that we care about their ideas, not just their capacity to write a coherent sentence or cite something in APA appropriately, but like, what are they trying to say? Justin, you mentioned your daughter, proudly showing this AI picture that she made, but she did make it. That was what was in her mind, right? So to get to your question, Blake, I think that exactly is the way that we bring our learning to life from this conference into our day-to-day, is showing each other that we care about each other's ideas and sitting with them, even in uncomfortable moments where we're trying to flesh them out and understand them better. Yesterday, at the end of the day, we heard about, it was a very enlightening presentation for me on the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning from Lauren Scharf.
Yeah.
And what I took away from that were several important things. One, everybody can do it, right? It is not just a social behavioral science. I'm a humanities person, and I can successfully execute the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning based on, a question that comes from what's in my mind, right? I learned also that the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning can start with something really simple. Actually, my favorite first framework that Lauren offered us was you could just ask a question of what is, right? Like what is? That is a research question. And I think something that, when I attend conferences like this, it reminds me, sometimes we try to jump over things so quickly so we can reach a solution that we forgot to really just grapple with what is. That's another way we can, sort of appreciate each other's intellects, right? What are you observing? What does that mean? That's research in and of itself. So I think I went a circuitous path to answer your question, but at the end of the day, what I'm saying is like, discourse is how we bring the learning to life. Just appreciating what everybody.
She's doing some discourse here.
I was just going to say thank you, and that really hits home for me in a number of ways, especially since I've been in this role where I have the opportunity to really interact closely across departments, and that really comes back to how do we reach across our across silos and experiment and share. And I think those things that you're speaking of, really, support that kind of broader overall ideal. And, some of the, I absolutely love that you encourage your folks to do research, especially when they interact with faculty, because what an enriching way for us to experiment and then really apply things from very different perspectives, to do better in each of our job roles. So love to see that, and have recently, worked, across multiple departments to review, different research proposals. And it's so refreshing to see that the co-pilots are from very different departments. So
Mhm.
really excited to see that. Looking forward to how those folks, complete that research and seeing those results. So thank you for really bringing that to the forefront of my mind and wrapping it all back into those three, big ideas that Blake shared with us at the beginning.
And Barbara and Teresa, I love the way that you both just made this incredibly accessible. We have a lot of practitioner faculty that when you say you're going to do research with a scholarship, it's like, well, that's scary. I am a nurse. I'm an early childhood educator. I'm a manager in a bank. I don't do research. But you say, no, if you ask what is, or my question, how might we, or we can experiment, we can try things, and we can bring that and give a space that's accessible so that even our team members feel like they belong in something that we call research or scholarship in this big way, and certainly our students as well. So I love the way you pitch that as accessible. So we are at a time that we want to bring out voices from everyone else that's participating here to it's not just questions from Blake, but I'm wondering if our colleagues who are in this session have questions or ideas or something that they might want to throw in. And so you could definitely throw these in the chat. And I think we have multiple chats going, depending whether you're on Whova or in straight up just into Zoom. And let me know if I missed any because there's a bunch of chat that I didn't track along the way.
Can I just unmute quick?
Please.
I think it was either Justin or Barb was talking about this idea around, use of AI not just as a tool but as a collaborator. There was research that was presented by a couple of our librarians yesterday that actually emphasized that there are students who believe that engaging with and using AI is going to get them in trouble. Simply the use of it. What can we do as an institution to correct that thinking? How do we change course? We had a lot of conversation around Turnitin and ensuring, what was being presented was of high academic integrity. But as we continue to evolve our understanding and learn from others about their scholarship in this area, how do we at UAGC sort of maybe course correct a little bit and help our students to think about AI differently?
Yeah. I love the question, Kate. Thank you so much. And I think I hope I invite the panel to weigh in on that because our students already think about it differently because they're using it differently where they work, right? And then they come to us and we're restricting it in ways. So any reactions to that?
I can jump in.
Yeah.
I always think about the Wayne Gretzky quote, like skate to where the puck is going to be instead of chasing the puck down the ice. And I think so in that context, how do we leverage AI to support our students? And I think it's incumbent on us as educators here at UAGC to create courses and learning activities that use AI as a partner versus something that could be leveraged in a way that we don't want them to leverage the tool. And so I think curriculum development is a big part of this. And how do we create learning activities that support that partnership with AI tools? So I think, and again, I am no expert. I'm currently taking courses right now so that I can skate to where the puck is versus chasing the puck. But over the course of the next year, 2 years, AI, the ability of AI to be integrated into the learning experience of our students is going to be, it'll be like a rocket ship. And so we have to be proactive in how we support that in the classroom. And so that our students don't feel that way, so that we're explicit on how to leverage the tool in the classroom and produce demonstrations of learning that are not dependent on AI, but are supported by AI.
Yeah. So, and Jennifer Dunn in the chat, talking about the ethical use of AI and AI literacy, which we're hung up on it. If you use it to demonstrate your learning, that's where you lied to us, and we're going to turn it in, check you, or whatever tool we're going to use to catch that. Where Justin, you mentioned your daughter. She created the spider eating the shark or whatever silliness that was, right? Like, even the tool actually spit out the image. So how do we build our learning that privileges that, the creative part, or not the hit print part, I guess. I don't know.
Could I add to this? Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Justin, go ahead. No.
no.
What you, Blake, and Tony are talking about is, what we're aiming for, and will take time to develop in curriculum and things like that. And I have been thinking about this a lot lately. I'm participating in a University of Arizona faculty learning community and I think lots of folks here are as well. It has been really enlightening to me because I am very hesitant about using AI, but what it has made me realize that, as an interim, as we're all learning about how we can better incorporate it into curriculum and promote literacy and everything, for right now, truly we can just have a conversation about the use with our students, right? So let's say they do submit something that they clearly didn't create, but AI did.
Right.
The key maybe is having a conversation with them about what their intent was, because clearly they inputted something that made the output that they submitted. So like, how can we have those conversations with them about what they intended to do, what sort of ideas they had that generated the prompt they used, or things like that.
How you show your work. What was it that you did to generate that prompt? So there's some pieces in the chat. Ted Ellis called out there the idea of like how we're building this kind of literacy. I'm wondering, Justin, in an RUAGC context, where you're thinking about this form of digital literacy and this context, so that in my mind, I'm talking about our students' digital lit, but I think actually that's the class I need to take. But where are you going with that and your faculty?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's all nascent. As Teresa was talking, I think the first step is that we all need to become fluent with AI, right? It's kind of like talking about the dangers of something when you've never tried it before, or you don't really know anything about it except like what you see in the news. And I think as people become more fluent in AI, like our faculty and others, they'll feel more comfortable to know when it's appropriate to apply AI to a business context, let's say, or to big data from UAGC. Like, why are we not using AI to tease out demographic information that we just can't see with our brains that could help us create interventions for specific types of students, right? We have our little way that we do it, lines of business, transfer credits, but it can see so much more. And so there's just, I mean, there's so many opportunities for this. But to Ted's question, yes, we definitely need to, so we have the digital fluency requirement in general education. But I would say, I think we should even go into the realm of considering a full prompt engineering course for students early on in general education. But then also there's so many business applications for AI, and you can use these systems, right? Like there are free systems out there that you can use to create your own bots. And so, as students progress through other programs, could we create like a strategy where students are reinforcing skills or being introduced to new types of AI skills? Because again, it's not just creating papers. That's like the lowest level of AI usage is like just having it create a paper for you. There's so much more fruitful ways of using it. So anyway, the answer to Ted's question is yes, we need to do it, and we're having ideas now, but we need to do it as a community as well, and we need to get ideas from program chairs about how to reinforce this across the programs. But I would just encourage people become fluent or as fluent as you can with the platforms. I know it's a little scary, but it gets even scarier, trust me. I have a bad shoulder, and if you've been using ChatGPT for a while, in the most recent upgrade, now it remembers things in the free version. So it's like it'll reference the fact that I have a bad shoulder because I had it set up a workout routine for me. And so now it'll be like, because you have a bad shoulder, I would recommend, and that was a conversation that we had 3 months ago, right?
Oh, wow.
It will get scarier in a certain sense, but I like it. It's really interesting. It's starting to remember things and to engage in different ways. But become fluent, and then a lot of the fear I think will dissipate, and it'll help us create creative ways to implement.
I want to turn to what I think may be our last question. Barbara Timsino a while ago asked about like how this impacts the future of higher education. And to go back to our topic of belonging, this is the tool that what I heard it can enable a different sense of belonging. If you're rather than giving a case study to a student in a class, but they're generating and interacting with a case study through an AI generator, then it's applying to their work and they're feeling like they belong in it, and they're demonstrating their learning actively rather than seeing whether they hit the bubbles on a sheet. And I think that completely shifts our thinking about how we build belonging through these tools to become partners along the way. So for a final word, I'm wondering what any of the rest of you might think about of wrapping together what you've heard over the past couple of days and how this applies to our organization and our learning around belonging, around AI, around all the things. I'll start with you, Barb, since I started with you at the outset of everything. Look at me picking on you.
Yeah, that's okay. I don't mind. There was so much information and so many wonderful ideas and how to bring that together. And really for me, it was that intersection of research and technology with human dignity. And I think it's the human dignity part of it that really hit home for me. And maybe that's it might be a strange thing for a scientist to say, especially one that studied plants and animals. But that human dignity part is really paramount. That's the thing that is most important, and really moving forward with that in mind. And I think my personal challenge that I'm going to make to myself is really taking some of that learning and creating a new matrix. A matrix that really identifies our students' strengths of where they're at and how that might be superimposed in the way that we teach research, in the way that we approach training our faculty, and really making those things that appear scary not so scary, but ensuring that we have, that the policy of ethical value as the backbone, to move things forward.
Well, thank you. I'm not even going to let anybody else answer, Barb, because that was so wonderful. That this was about the intersection of technology and human dignity. I mean, if that drives us forward, I don't know what else could. That's fantastic. So, friends, we are at time. We have in the chat the link for the TLC conference evaluation. There's one more session to go, our closing session. And so either Teresa or Haley, do you want to tee that up for us before folks transition? And before I hand it off to you, I just want to thank Barb and Tony and Justin and Teresa for being part of our dialogue today. Yeah. So.
And
Teresa?
thank you, Blake, for moderating. I will hand us off to the next session because I think Haley's already over there setting up, but we invite everybody to join our closing session. You'll hear from Blake and Gary once more, as well as Tony Farrell, to make an exciting announcement about some TLC developments next year. And we will be sharing the winners of the conference awards, which you all nominated as you filled out these session feedback forms. So thanks for joining us for our panel, and we'll see you in the next meeting room.
All right. See you in a second. Thank you all.